In June 1967, with its back against the wall, the Israeli government launched a surprise attack on Egypt. Within a few days, the Egyptian army had been pushed beyond the Suez Canal, and when Jordan and Syria fired at Israel, they too were pushed back. Jordan beyond the Jordan River, and Syria away from the Golan Heights. This outcome caught everyone by surprise. The Arab world blamed the Soviet equipment for the defeat and vowed to erase the disgrace, while the 19-year-old state of Israel thought the '67 war would be the last symmetric conflict it would face for decades to come. With the help of the Soviet Union and oil-rich Arab countries, Syria and Egypt were able to build massive armies, equipped with the best Soviet weapons of the time. At the same time, the Israeli government neglected its emergency warehouses and postponed much-needed upgrades. On top of that, the IDF intelligence created what has become known as the Conception, a belief that without gaining access to some game-changing weapons, Israel's enemies were highly unlikely to start a war. When such weapons were introduced, in the form of anti-aircraft and anti-tank guided missiles, IDF intelligence failed to recalculate the risk. When finally it became clear, on one early Saturday morning, that the war is about to break, somehow the news did not trickle down to the officers in the field. Some of them it caught by complete surprise, while the more informed ones were under the impression that they were facing a one-day battle or a one-day of fire exchange from static positions. As of late 1973, the Syrian army consisted of 5 divisions with 1,500 tanks, 1,000 artillery barrels, and 60,000 men. Most of the tanks in the infantry divisions were T-55s, while the armored divisions and some elite armored brigades were equipped with the then-new T-62 tanks. The Soviet strategy, which was devised with Syria and Egypt, was to capitalize on Israel's small army and launch a surprise attack before the Israeli reserve divisions could spring into action. The date chosen was the 6th of October 1973, which coincided with the Jewish Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, when TV and radio services are suspended and most people spend the entire day at synagogue and fasting. Knowing that Israel would not be able to keep its reserve forces in active duty for a long time, without paying an economical and political price in the coming elections, the Soviets advised Syria and Egypt to carry out large-scale military maneuvers a year before the war actually broke out. The Soviet attack plan was called Deep Operation, and has been hatched in the USSR during the 1920s and 30s. First by Vladimir Trianfilov and further developed by Mikhail Tukhachevsky. The theory advocated an attack on all sectors, waiting for an indication of weakening in the enemy lines. Then, designated armored divisions will be employed to break through the enemy lines, outflanking pockets of resistance and preventing reinforcement from entering the battle. The Syrian-Soviet plan dictated air and artillery barrage, while special bridge tanks will cross the anti-tank ditches. The Syrian tanks, infantry, and commando units, armed with the new Sagr-guided missiles and RPGs, will take control over strategic positions behind the Israeli lines and will eliminate any attempt to retake the tank position and later fend off reinforcement attempts. Meanwhile, the IDF defense plan assumed that it would have at least 3 days to prepare for any major attack. It also assumed that the northern terrain, with its small volcanic hills, will be too difficult for any significant tank column to breach. The assumption was that the Syrian army is most likely to attack at the center, at the Quneitra Plateau, or in the south towards Khushnia. The south sector had no high ground to overlook the border. In the central sector, the IDF designated the Booster Ridge as a tank position to overlook the valley below, albeit at the very end of the Israeli tank range. The IDF strategic defense plan was for the active army, with the help of the Air Force, to hold back the Syrians in the initial hours of the onslaught until the reserve divisions will come to the rescue. However, as we shall see, the war caught the IDF completely by surprise. They were unprepared, with less than 200 tanks and almost no infantry to cover for the tanks, and the new Soviet anti-aircraft missile batteries, rendering the Israeli Air Force almost completely useless. Following increased activity on the Syrian side of the border, and after continuous pledges from the IDF Chief of Staff, the Israeli government, mainly the Minister of Defense Moshe Dayan, finally approved the 7th Tank Brigade with 105 tanks to join the 188 Brigade, which at the time had 71 tanks. In addition, 2 infantry battalions were scattered along the 40 miles long border. Half of the 188 Brigade has been sent to the northern sector, and from that point, the entire south sector from Quneitra Plateau to the Jordan border was to be defended by 50 tanks from the 53rd Battalion. As the battle began, and after some discussions, the 7th Brigadier sent the 82nd Battalion to the south under the command of the 188. At 5 minutes to 2, some 1,000 artillery barrels started pounding the Israeli positions. With a massive airstrike from the Syrian Air Force, the Israeli tanks had no choice but to retreat from their positions until the barrage was over. Syrian Infantry Division 7, with the help of the Moroccan Expedition Brigade, managed to gain some ground while exchanging fire with the 74th Tank Battalion. During the afternoon, and with the cover of night, Syrian Division 9 attempted to outflank the Booster Ridge. The north and center sectors probably deserve their own video, but at the moment we will concentrate on the south sector, where the Israeli lines had been breached. In the south, from their positions, the Israeli tanks could see the Syrian bridge tanks and bulldozers filling the anti-tank ditches. And since they assumed they're facing a short, limited fire exchange, no real consideration was given to replenishing ammunition or to moving forward maintenance crews. As the battle continued and the sun set, tank commanders had to ration their ammunition and to ask repeatedly for more. While fire exchange took place along the entire front, the 112 and 61st Infantry Brigades managed to breach the anti-tank ditches and get closer to the Israeli positions. As night fell, and with the help of infrared searchlight, the 132 Mechanized Brigade slipped almost undetected south of the 116 post, while sometime after, the 46th Tank Brigade managed to break through south of Tel Faris. In the first hours of the night, reports of Syrian tanks deep behind Israeli lines made it to the northern operation room. Those reports were transmitted back to Ben Shoham at the field and were dismissed by him and his staff officers, who couldn't see any Syrian tanks around them. As it turned out after the first night, the Syrians made use of infrared searchlights, while the Israelis couldn't see much more than a few meters in front of them. During the first hours of the night, the 53rd Battalion suffered losses and ran out of ammunition. Supply could not make its way to the front lines, as it encountered enemy forces deep inside the south sector. After 9 p.m., a short distance to the north, while tanks from the 82nd Battalion exchanged fire with the 52nd and 33rd Mechanized Brigades, the 51st Tank Brigade went deep inside the Hushniya region, undetected and unscathed. As Syrian tanks from the 46th and 51st Tank Brigades went deeper into the south sector, they were met at 10 p.m. by 2 tanks commanded by Tzvika Greengold, an officer who left the brigade for an advanced course a week before and now arrived by himself to the sector, trying to hold back the Syrians with whatever tanks he could muster. By changing fire positions and with some luck, Tzvika managed to imitate a larger force and hold back the Syrians until reinforcements arrived. Instead of sending organic battalions, brigades, and divisions, as was originally planned, the IDF HQ slowly grasped the severity of the situation and scrambled tanks from the south sector as soon as they could be taken from their emergency warehouses. At midnight, the first reserve tanks made it to the front. 4 were sent to protect the road leading to the Golan in the south. They fired at the 132nd Mechanized Brigade and prevented it from sliding to the valley below. 7 Centurion tanks from the 266th Armored Battalion arrived to the oil road just after midnight. They were sent immediately to help Tzvika. This force now consisted of 9 tanks in total and was immediately ambushed by Sagar missiles and RPGs. 5 Israeli tanks were lost in quick succession. In the confusion, Zvika's tank was hit by friendly fire. He climbed to another tank, while the less operative tanks took the wounded and the dead back to the base. Once again, Zvika was left alone, holding the line south of Nafach until the early hours of the morning.